Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Daniel Davis Deep Dive, coming to you live from London, England. And we're actually live in front of the Parliament building. And I wish I would be doing this from inside the Parliament building, but they have some rules that they said they might shoot me if I tried. So I don't know about that. I didn't want to risk it. So we're here today. We have been, along with our one of the fans of the show, Matt Ho, one of our biggest fans, rather, who actually came with me, and we were actually in on this together. And I'm going to bring him in here in just a second, and you're going to hear some of his observations, some of what he said. You're actually going to hear because some of the people in this were actually members of Parliament, and it was really awesome to see. But there was also lots of business leaders from all over the world that were here, want to know what the truth of it is. So we kind of had the Daniel Davis Deep Dive show on the road today because they heard a lot of the things that you guys have been hearing. And a lot of people told us they really appreciated hearing the truth. I heard from some of the members after the show was over. They said exactly the same thing there. But let's bring Matt in here. So Matt, welcome back to the show. Welcome to here, and welcome to England, even though it's not my country.
Yeah, hey, thanks for putting this together, Danny. And this was just like Danny said, it was a great conference, an absolute, really important opportunity to speak with some pretty key people who don't necessarily hear our point of view. And I'll say that we also had, it wasn't just Danny and I, we had an economist from Rand Corporation with us. We had, as well, the former director of British intelligence with us. So you had a panel that you would look at it and say, these guys aren't going to agree. And actually, we did agree. We might disagree on some minor points.
Yeah, and that was one of the interesting things. I thought that because I was actually told that Lord West, that was his name, was not going to agree with us on many things. Right. And I was told by some other people that he's basically kind of what the British government has said. But I was shocked that he was nearly right in line with Daniel Davis Deep Dive. So
he was, and he was, I think, more fiery than you and I were.
Yeah.
In the sense of like, just maybe he was more comfortable in terms of, because he's also a member of the House of Lords and everything, so maybe he was more comfortable berating his fellow Parliament members than we were being in their house. But yeah, it was a real opportunity to have a chance to talk to more than 100 people who are either members of Parliament or CEOs. So not the typical audience we get to speak with, but it shows the need to diversify as many audiences that we can get to, or speak to as many audiences as we can get to, because what we talk about is based upon analysis, and we're trying to be objective. And what we were met with was really emotion. It gets to like Bacon's idols of the tribe kind of thing, where people's values are disturbed. What they've been taught is being upset. It's an affront to everything they were raised with. But the reality is that this is what warfare is like. As Danny said a number of times, war doesn't care about your morality. It doesn't care about who's right, who's wrong. It's something I speak about a lot. It's a superhuman force warfare. And when you look at the analysis of what's happening there, the only way out of this is through negotiations. And the dangers of not negotiating are immense. And so having a strategy of hope that hopefully this will work out. Hopefully tens and tens of billions of euros and pounds and dollars will keep showing up, and hopefully the Ukrainian army won't collapse. I mean, that's something only fools, fools and ideologues will hold on to.
And one of the interesting things I thought was there was some people there from Poland, from Lithuania, and they got a different view on this than a lot in the West do, and it is more emotion, but it's also based on history. But as we talk to some of them, the emotions in the history even, you still have to come back to reality, because you can't seek the unattainable because it's, quote, the right thing to do, or you have this strong emotion. And I thought that was interesting.
Right. There are some very, I tell you, Danny and I do a lot of panels and things like that, and this was the most...
Are we back live? Okay. I'm so sorry. We ran into some unexpected technical difficulties, but we're back on schedule now. We have the problem solved. I apologize for that, for all you who are sticking with us here. So let's continue on, and I apologize really for those who've been waiting for this next sentence. But I wanted to ask Matt to read his opening statement. It's only about 4 or 5 minutes. but I just thought it was really amazing, and it encapsulates all this stuff here. And then we're going to get into a little bit about what some of the commentary was about it. And then, ironically, we're going to see some comments coming out of both Moscow and in Kiev that really relate well to what he's been saying. So first of all, here, I'll give the floor to Matt. So this was given for several members of parliament shortly, or not long ago.
All right, thanks, Danny. Appreciate it. In a traditional sense of victory, the capture and control of the entirety of Ukraine, the war is unwinnable for Russia. While the Russian military and economy have grown stronger over the last 2 years, the size and resources, as well as the political will required to defeat and occupy all of Ukraine, are still well outside what Russia could marshal, field, and produce. The problem the Russians also have is for every mile they advance westward, they encounter fewer Russian-speaking Ukrainians and more Ukrainian speakers. The Russians, by their admission, go from liberator to occupier the further west they move. Success along the conventional front lines of the war, pushing the Ukrainian army westward, creates the probability of insurgency in their rear. So the Russians are increasingly perplexed with a two-front war, the further west they move. Again, a war in which they cannot achieve a traditional military victory. Just as the war is unwinnable for the Russians, it is unwinnable for Ukraine and NATO. There is no possibility of Ukraine's conventional victory over Russia. Russia is just too big and strong for that. We've seen a great deal of Russian preparation, competence, and adaptation in this war that needs to be respected and not underestimated. In Western politics, strategy, policies, and media, we have seen the opposite of that, and the Ukrainians are paying the price for it. The results promised by NATO these last 2 years have not come to pass. The collapse of the Russian economy, the defeat of the Russian army, and regime change in Russia. According to the American government, Russia is stronger now than it was 2 years ago. Russia is in a much better position than Ukraine and the West to wage an ongoing war of attrition. To expel Russia from Ukraine, a NATO army, an army in a literal sense, 3 to 5 corps of armor and mechanized infantry units with full air, naval, and missile support attacking deep into Russia is required. In short, it would be World War III. The collapse of the Ukrainian military due to manpower, supply issues, including weapons and munitions, general officer incompetence, corruption, and tactical and operational defeat is a serious possibility. The same possibility exists for a collapse of the Ukrainian government due to corruption, loss of public support, economic financial stress, and conceivable coup. The continued NATO goal of a World War II-style victory over Russia exasperates not only the risk of Ukrainian collapse and prolonged further suffering of Ukraine's people and land, but through the inevitability and inescapability of escalation, this NATO goal creates a risk trajectory that no one here should be willing to accept, particularly when compared with the prospects of a negotiated settlement. A risk analysis for both sides leads to the conclusion that attempting a negotiated peace is much more reasonable than continuing an unwinnable war with its dangers of Ukrainian collapse for the West, an unwinnable forever war for Russia, and nuclear war for us all. For Ukraine and the West, the continuation of the current NATO strategy means hoping for a stalemated war, hoping for tens of billions of dollars, pounds, and euros to remain available to prevent collapse, and hoping that escalation doesn't become apocalyptic. At the same time, the dying and destruction continue, something I have given much too little attention to. At best, this time next year, the same unwinnable meat grinder of a war is raging, only with the risks worsened by time. A golden bridge built through a negotiated political settlement, as the Chinese military philosopher Sun Tzu would undoubtedly recommend, is something that should be taken by both sides to exit from the war.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask Matt to read that because, some of the issues that you see here is that the war can't be won. So the question is, what are you going to do? Yeah. Are we going to keep doing the same thing that we've been doing, or are you going to try to do something different, something that makes sense, something that can be attainable? And we saw a number of people in there, and Lord West was one of them, to where he's actually starting to come around to that same view that you have to do what's obtainable and what's possible, not just what you would like. Right. Now, one of the other things that I found interesting that lots of people in there are saying, hey, Putin won't make a deal. He just wants to conquer everything. And I think that gets back to the point you were saying about it's kind of emotion-based. Yeah. Because you made some comments in there that he's been trying to make a negotiation for a while. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that.
Right, and it was important, too, when I made those comments, and I know our moderator, Steve Myers, who's a businessman, who's dealt a lot with Russia in that business. And, none of us
I think the point I was trying to make, he really wanted to get to that, was dispelling this idea that, as you said, Danny, Putin doesn't want to negotiate. Russia won't negotiate. When we've seen attempt after attempt, and they still speak about it. Every other time he speaks about it, about Ukraine, the Russians leave open the possibility for negotiation. One of the things I want to make sure that they understood, so when I referenced the previous negotiation attempts, I made sure to include references to mainstream media. Yeah. So the April 2022 negotiations, or the April 22 negotiated settlement that almost was.
Sorry about that.
Yeah. I made sure to say, hey, and you can read about this in Foreign Affairs. You can read about this in the Wall Street Journal. Both of those publications that no one is going to consider Kremlin mouthpieces.
Right.
Wrote very long, detailed dissections of what that April 2022 agreement looked like, and it was basically what everyone is saying it would look like. I referenced the fact that Reuters had a very long story in February, I think it was, talking about how the Russians tried to negotiate all through 2023. And then, of course, if you look back to the beginning of after the invasion, you see media report after media report across the Western mainstream press talking about the negotiations that went on for 6 weeks, essentially, between the Russians and the Ukrainians, first in Belarus, then in Turkey. So the fact that it's you have people who are essentially covering their ears and not wanting to hear this, it gets back to this is what you're up against. And what I found a bit concerning about some of the pushback we got was that it came from business leaders, CEOs, who you can't run your business this way. You can't just run your business believing that our product is the best and none of the metrics, none of the data, none of the information I have on us or the competitors, they wouldn't sit in a boardroom, and if one of their folks said, the chairman of Pepsi is not going to allow his people to be like, no, you can't believe anything Coke says. You don't look at any of the numbers Coke has. It doesn't matter. Those guys are bastards. Just ignore everything Coca-Cola is doing, and just go along with the mantra that we're better than them. No one in business who does well, doesn't go bankrupt, operates that way. So I was a little surprised at how willing, but as one person was saying to you, Danny, afterwards, how what we were saying is just simply not heard in the conventional discourse. Even though you could bring the former British head of intelligence on the dais with us and have him say all this stuff, and they still don't want to believe it.
And look, and I want to show you, this is some of the things that's happening in Russia today. So I think it was today anyway. You had Putin talking about some things, and he's going to be you're going to see a little frustration on his point, but you're also going to see him talking about some things where there is a possibility for negotiations.
Что касается того, что происходит на Харьковском направлении, это тоже их вина, потому что они обстреливали и продолжают, к сожалению, обстреливать жилые кварталы приграничных территорий, включая Белгород. Там же гражданские люди гибнут. Все же очевидно, стреляют прямо по центру города, по жилым кварталам. И я говорил публично, что если это будет продолжаться, мы вынуждены будем создать зоны безопасности, санитарную зону. Вот мы это и делаем. Что касается Харькова, то таких планов на сегодняшний день нет.
Now, of course, one of the things you said there is we currently don't have any plans for taking Kharkov City. And I can confirm that. I think that's what we've talked about on our show several times. Look, there's just not enough men there. They have enough to actually create a border, but they don't have enough to take the city. But they do have enough to put a lot of pressure on it, which I think goes to the point that Putin's not trying to conquer the country. He's trying to get to a point to where he can have a negotiated settlement. But you also have Zelensky, who's he doesn't want to hear any of that. And what you're about to see here from Zelensky, which we've shown, similar comments about this before. We also saw represented by many in this conference today, many in the West, who, like Matt just said, they're kind of blocking their minds to what's really going on and what they want to go on, where he said this.
Today I spoke with the leaders of Spain, Belgium, Latvia, Finland, and Cabo Verde. Step by step, we will establish a truly global community. Every continent will be represented at our summit in Switzerland. While Moscow is using the term multipolarity just hypocritically to cover its attempts to control the lives of other nations, We are creating a real tool for real multipolarity. We are inviting the world majority to the Peace Summit.
So it's a real tool for a real peace summit, except Russia's not there. Now, what kind of logic does it make to say we're going to seek a negotiated settlement, and you're not going to bring one of the parties to the war? I mean, what did you think about when you hear stuff like that?
You know, it's hard to come up with the right words for that, because it's similar to what we saw in this conference, this unwillingness to accept reality, right? Or to even understand reality. You know, Zelensky has to understand that his force structure, the current campaigns, previous campaigns, the willingness of the U.S. and the Europeans to back them to the end is in doubt, and that's why I think he's back on his. He's back in his theatrical mode. He's back in selling his you know, doing the job of president and being the cheerleader in chief for the war, in a way that, you know, we both talked about this earlier. We saw him this past week. You know, if you go and you watch the video of Tony Blinken being in this past week, and you see Zelensky across the table from him, and the look on Zelensky's face is something that none of us have seen before. I mean, this is a man who is not just exhausted and tired, but, you know, the curtain's up. I mean, I think when he went and visited Kharkiv, and he made that statement months ago about how the defense is there, that we're all right, you know, and then it didn't come to pass, and, you know, Ukrainian military officers are saying the Russians just walked right in, you know, as well as, too, he's got to sit through Blinken telling him how much we're in support. Meanwhile, it took 6 months to pass the aid bill, for the assistance bill for Ukraine, with overwhelming support. I think that's something people aren't recognize, is that even though it got 300 votes, or however many, in the House, and then, of course, sailed through the Senate, it still took 6 months to pass it. So even though the support for the war is only going to diminish, but also, too, you have such political uncertainty that he can't control. And so I think him looking at the trajectory of this thing, realizing what's real, what's not real, and then looking forward, you know, that look on his face when, as Blinken is selling, you know, before he, you know, when he's selling him, you know, all this rhetoric about support forever and we're with you to the end, right? You know, I mean, I think that's why you see that where
of course,
you know,
discuss security.
Oh, there he is. Okay, but what you see, like, where he dropped out of character, right? And you saw the real person.
Yeah, and so and he's worried. And here's what worries me, though, is that while he's continuing to try to step back into character, the situation on the battlefield's continued to deteriorate. And so on his this peace process, he's talking about doing this. I think it's Switzerland. Is it Swiss?
Yeah, this goes back.
Wait, what's the place of it? Is it Switzerland?
Is it Geneva?
Geneva, yeah. So he's wanting to do that. Well, we just asked the question, well, how are you going to have a negotiated settlement when you're not even going to have one of the parties to the deal? Putin asked that same question in the same press conference I just showed you.
Добиться стратегического положения не получилось, но нате вам вот теперь вот наши условия. С дуба рухнули, что ли? С какой стати-то? Сук, на котором сами сидят. Глупость ужасная. Ну, им никак не остановиться. Теперь, значит, запищали, давайте там срочно конференцию. Пожалуйста. Россия будет участвовать? Мы готовы участвовать в мирных переговорах. Но мы вас не приглашаем. Вот те кино, здрасте, приехали.
See, and that's one of the things I keep going back to, that Putin, we saw, I think in one of the last shows I did before I left the U.S., is that we had a clip there of Blinken saying, yeah, we talk negotiations, but Putin doesn't want to talk negotiations. All he wants to do is fight. And yet here, we showed you that was nonsense at the time. But now that here you have Putin again, after his visit with Xi Jinping, saying, I want to have a negotiated settlement, I'm willing to, but it's got to be between two people that recognize the reality on the ground. Now, if there actually is some acknowledgement of the reality on the ground, what do you think that is going to be the negotiated settlement? Because I want to point this out. This is one of the biggest, it was the biggest contentious point in our conference that we just had here among the population. They really got excited about this and emotional. We're saying that there's got to be some kind of a negotiated settlement But it's one that you're not going to like because you don't get the one that you want where just everybody's going to get what the way one in the West, the 1991 borders, however you want to define it. It's got to be where both sides come out with some kind of what they can even call a win themselves. But nobody wants to give Russia a win. But what happens when you don't want to acknowledge the way it's going to have to happen with the guy who's got the big military power and reality?
Right, and one of the problems too with negotiations is who's willing to do this, who's willing to be involved in terms of a major power that would have leverage over both sides to make sure that the negotiations were followed through. So you're talking about, well, you have to have someone like India, but the Indians don't seem like they're in any hurry to get involved with this. A lot of it, I think, has to do with they don't trust the Americans on it. One of the things is you had this refusal to accept what the other side is saying, and so even if we had just played that clip in there about Putin talking as he did about we have no aims on Kharkiv, we want a buffer zone, they would dismiss that. It would have been dismissed. I mean, again, we had the former director of British intelligence sitting there with us, who was also the former Sea Lord of the British Navy. He was essentially the chief of naval operations for the British Navy, and people were essentially accusing him of being a Putin mouthpiece, right? I mean,
he took exception to that.
He did, exactly.
I am not a mouthpiece for Putin.
Well, that's the whole thing. Is here's this man who's given his life to this country, who has been involved in all kinds of things, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And why would he be up there, telling you in a rather analytical way something he didn't believe? But they don't want to hear it. People don't want to hear it. And this is a real problem. And regarding what does a negotiation settlement look like, it's not going to look like what it could have looked like 2 years ago. So if you go and you read, and I would encourage people to go to the Foreign Affairs article by Samuel Charap about this, about 25 pages long, where he really goes through the document. He does a great job doing it. It's very helpful. And what you see is essentially at that point, you're looking at a negotiated settlement that was going to be a withdrawal of Russian forces out of withdrawal to 2022 boundaries, basically, or pre-February 2022 boundaries. And you're looking at, as well, a neutrality for Ukraine, which was based upon the Austrian model of neutrality that came about in the mid-50s, right? As well as other aspects where it demilitarized eastern Ukraine. You're not going to get those now. You're not going to get those. Why would the Russians? I mean, they were offering that 2 years ago. You said no. We'll beat you militarily. We're going to be victorious over the Russians. We're going to send them packing out of Ukraine. And then 2 years later, when you haven't done that, and when the Russian economy is stronger than it was, when the maybe not fully stronger, but it hasn't suffered the way it was predicted to suffer. The Russian military certainly is stronger than it was 2 years ago. I think agree that. None of us on the panel, I think that this wartime economy for the Russians is going to last forever. We get a couple of years out of it, 3 years, and then it becomes unsustainable. So that, when people ask, why do you think the Russians will negotiate, is because there are these various aspects where they are stuck. In an open-ended war for the Russians, it's going to hurt them in the long term. You can't sustain a wartime economy for that long a time, as well as being stuck in a war where I think the point I was trying to make is that for the Russians, every mile they go further west, they're pushing more into ethnic Ukrainian territory. And so, you can push all the way to the river. You can take Kyiv. But the problem is now you're going to have an occupation. And you're going to have both a conventional front line and an insurgency to deal with. The Russians don't want that.
They have many reasons not to want that.
But the problem is that you offered negotiations. You had a settlement. The West came in. They tore it up in front of you and said, we're going to beat you. And now they haven't beaten you. Why do you think you're going to get the same deal that you could have gotten 2 years ago? And you see other things, too. Russia never talks about annexing territory until 6 months after the negotiations fail. Right? And it's annexation. How do you go back on annexation? Right? So, it'd be, at this point, you're talking about Ukraine giving up territory, but essentially, technically, you're also asking Russia to give up territory. And this is a reality of our creating,
Yeah, and getting back to the non-reality, so here's Zelensky, and I think this one might have been today, but you see, it's like all these things aren't happening. They're not losing ground in the north. They're not losing ground in the east. And he's still talking maximalist hopes. Check this out.
We discussed in detail the combat operations in the Kharkiv region, the protection of people, our positions, and the needs of the units that defend our positions. Now, thanks to our forces, our measures, we have managed to build confidence in the direction of Vovchansk. However, Russian shelling and threats persist. Today, in particular, the head of the Vovchansk administration was wounded. Our counterattacks are ongoing, including in other parts of the Kharkiv border area. Russia is trying to expand the war, invariably accompanying it with empty words about peace. We must force Russia into a real just peace by all means. And we are thoroughly working with our partners to provide Kharkiv, Donetsk, Sumy, and other regions with more basic protection, namely air defense systems and sufficient long-range weapons.
Okay, you're going to force Russia into doing that. I mean, you tried to do that in 2023, and you knew it didn't work. You thought it was going to. You thought you were going to punch them out. You broke your teeth on their front lines, and now you're doing nothing but going back in all these areas. There's a new one, and yet he still wants to talk about forcing Russia to do something that he could have had in 2022 and again in 2023. So there's no reason to believe that. The question I have, though, Matt, is what's going to happen now? At some point, we're going to have to say, it doesn't matter what you say, Zelensky. We're not going to support that. But how could that work now when you have him saying stuff like this?
Well, and also, too, what the Americans are saying, and certainly like the commitment of the Americans as well as the British and the French. You know, we talked about this. I spoke at the UN Security Council a couple months ago now. And one of the things that really was scary to me was not just the remarks from the Americans to the British, but especially remarks from the French ambassador at the UN Security Council, who he looked at the Russian ambassador and said, "We are not giving up. We are basically, you know, our bank account is larger than your bank account, and we will persist." And it's because this is the politics of it, right? So we talk a lot about tactical, operational, strategic levels. And you know, it depends upon the military person talking to whether or not he wants to admit it or not. But above strategic is political, and the politics matter. And the Biden White House believes that this war is good for the re-election. It's hard to understand. I mean, it requires some very convoluted thinking and reasoning here. But they do believe, I think, because the base Biden voters still are flying their blue and yellow Ukrainian flags outside their house. They believe that this war is a good thing for their re-election. They also, I think, don't have a good perception. The political folks don't have a good perception on what's actually occurring there. These people all believed a year ago that the Ukrainian offensive of 2023 was going to work. They really believed, they listened to Ben Hodges and people like that the Ukrainians were going to smash through the lines. They were going to cut the connection, the land corridor connection between Russia and Crimea. It was going to put Russia in a terrible position, and Russia would have to back out. They really believed that. And the political people defer to people like Hodges. Yeah. They defer to these other, you know. And
yeah, I think because that's what they want to hear.
That's what they want to hear.
He's a 4-star general, or 3-star general. Yeah. So
yeah. So I think, you know,
reality.
Exactly. That's the problem. So I don't think the idea of a Ukrainian collapse, which is very possible before November, is an implication of it. And I think they also have worked out that they can blame this on the Republicans. So the stab in the back, the stab in the back is already out there. That theory, that explanation is already out there. You've heard it already with this offensive that just is happening in the Kharkiv region. If the Republicans had approved the $60 billion, that would
have made all the difference in the world.
Yeah, and we all know that's complete nonsense.
Yeah, yes, wouldn't have made any difference at all. The way I was saying it, it's like you have a cancer patient, stage 4 cancer, and now then they also have a cold.
Yeah.
That's not good, but whether you have a cold or not, it's not going to change stage 4 cancer. The weapons then wouldn't make any more difference than they are doing now.
Right.
That's just the reality of it. Well, listen, folks, we really appreciate you joining with us today, and I know this little impromptu situation here outside. I know it's been loud, and I appreciate you staying with us. But, you know, things continue to happen, and, you know, Matt and I were here in London talking to some folks here that we're hoping to try and bring more reality into it so that something that makes sense, that has a chance to end the suffering for the Ukraine people. And that's what drives both of us, I think, is that we care about the Ukraine people maybe more than these people in Washington claim to. But we want to see this war end as quickly as possible so that we can get to at least starting the process for peace, which is already going to be a generation to try to accomplish even after the shooting starts. but we'll deal with that one later. But for now, thanks for joining. Please do like and subscribe and share this with other people, because we keep giving you stuff that you just don't get anywhere else. This is the reality stuff here, folks, and we keep giving it to you. Thanks, and we'll see you next time on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.